Moving on to the highlight of this webinar, we are honored and privileged to have with us an international consultant and instructor for the College of Law at Michigan State University. Our resource speaker earned her MSA in International Business Administration from Central Michigan University and her Master of Public Health and Master of Science in Food Safety from Michigan State University, along with certificates in HACCP or HACCP and International Food Laws and Regulations. She recently completed lead auditor training for FSSC and ISO 22000. She comes from an agricultural background and has traveled around the world independently and with US aid to build food safety cultures from farm to plate in over 45 countries, including 14 African countries, the Middle East, Latin, and South America. She draws from all available resources to coordinate and facilitate programs and services for a comprehensive approach to food safety. She is skilled at translating complex technical concepts into innovative and coherent messages that resonate. Her expertise has helped farmers, processors, and governments improve their food safety systems and increase food export opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ms. Christine L. Blackledge, MSA, MPH, MSFS, and a Global Food Law Instructor. Welcome, Christine. How are you doing? I think it's the evening there at your time zone.
It is. I've been at this quite a bit yet today, so hopefully my voice handles this for the next few hours. And hopefully we can work together on this. So I am excited about doing this, and hopefully we can all learn something.
Yes. All right. That's good to know. So, Christine, I give the virtual floor to you.
Okay. Basically, I'm hoping we can go over some of the things that have to do with global food law, how labeling fits into food fraud, and how other countries are utilizing some of the technology and the information that we have. Everyone thinks that we need more technology, more ways of testing the food. And in reality, many of the countries, including the United States and the EU, use labeling for most of our food fraud and for our import-export issues. So hopefully I can help you with some of that so you can see how that is done. Of course, that's going to change with time with AI now. And hopefully we can go through these slides. I'm willing to answer any questions you have. I think we are going to take the questions at the end, but if there's something of real importance, don't hesitate to bring it to my attention and we'll try to deal with it. So I'm looking forward to this, and I hope that you learn something from it that can help you. Okay, do you have the PowerPoint available? Or should I bring it up?
Christine, you will be presenting the slides, please, if you would.
I can share it on my screen if we need to.
All right, we'll present it from our end.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, there we go. Food fraud, when what you eat isn't what it's supposed to be. Quite often we assume that when we're told that we have olive oil, we have wine, we have certain types of fish, honey, spices, that's exactly what we are getting when we purchase it, but that's not always true. Okay, food fraud takes place when the food or the food labeling is substituted, tampered, or misrepresented for economic gain. So many times there would not be a problem with the food if it's been substituted, if it's labeled that it is substituted, but it's something is misrepresented in it. You haven't put in what is actually in the food. And so then that it is food fraud. So food fraud is a collective term. It can encompass many different things, such as the deliberate and intentional. It can be a substitution, an addition, tampering, or misrepresentation. It can be food ingredients, or the food packaging is what can be changed. It can be a false or misleading statement made about a product. And it is usually for economic gain. So these are some of the ways that food fraud happen. There can be a dilution. Sometimes this is not that important health-wise. Other times it's very important, like when milk was diluted with water and then melamine was added to it for infant formula. There can be substitutions. This happens quite a bit in a food chain, more than we realize, that we've substituted one substance for another, but we did not put it in the label. And it also can be bad for health. It doesn't have to be a safe. It can also be a false substitution that actually has health implications. It can be a contaminant. A contaminant can be against your health, or it can be very seriously added to it. The gray market, theft, diversion, tampering with it, mislabeling, unapproved enhancements, overruns, or counterfeiting. These are the substances that we quite often are talking about, the dilution or the substitution of something. We can make a lot of money in that. When it comes to olive oil, instead of being pure olive oil, you might have mixed it and diluted it with something else, or substituted the olive oil for a different type of oil. It can be an artificial enhancement. It can be a food coloring to make the paprika or the spice look redder or yellow or whatever color we're expecting. It can also be a filler that dilutes the paprika or the spice. Use of undeclared, unapproved, or banned biocides. We have even had when we've put pesticides within food. The removal of the authentic constituents. So we're saying, okay, it's not really the spice. Instead, we've added some filler to it and removed some of the authentic constituents of it. It can be a misrepresentation of the nutritional value. The melamine was added to the baby formula because it seemed to raise the protein value of it. So it was a misrepresentation of that. There can be fraudulent labeling claims on it. We can say that it's healthy. We can say that it's that we've used it organic. We can put many different things. It's halal. And it's fraudulent because we haven't done any of those things. We just want the market that is interested in that. There can be a formulation of a fraudulent product. Instead of being what we think it is, it's something totally different, and the product isn't even what we're purchasing. And in the market, there can be counterfeits. They can get labeling from some source that we are familiar with and use that labeling. They can take the theft of overruns in the gray markets and utilize that and resell it. So the dilution is a process of mixing an ingredient of high value with an ingredient of a lower value. And so you've diluted it and you're going to get the same price for it. There can be a substitution, the process of replacing a nutrient or an ingredient, a food or a part of a food with another one that's of lower value. There again, the profit margin is going to be increased. It can be concealment, a process of hiding the low quality of the food ingredients, products. It can be an unapproved substitute, process of adding unknown or undeclared compounds to food products in order to enhance their quality attribute, as in making it look like it had a higher protein value. It can be counterfeit, infringements to an intellectual property rights, mislabeling, false claims or distortion of information provided on the label and packaging. The gray market forgery can be production theft, diversion. We're going to talk a lot about the mislabeling because we see that a lot when it comes to trade. Okay, so here, what is food fraud? It's the fraudulent activities that are intentional in order to make an economic gain. It's a violation of the legal rules at the expense of the customer. It's always the end is the customer that is paying for the product and not getting what they think they're supposed to be getting. Food fraud activates a risk to the humans, to the animal, to plant health, to animal welfare, or to the environment. So when we look at some of the most common types of food fraud, there's unapproved treatment or processes. Sometimes I was just in Lebanon and we ran into this because they didn't know any better, but they were processing the low acid the same way that they were processing high acid foods without realizing that that was an unapproved treatment for low acid foods. So sometimes there's a replacement or dilution, addition or removal. And then there's an absent, falsified, manipulated documentation. But the most common is mislabeling. We think we're getting something, we look at the label, and then we find out if it's been tested or if it finally comes into light that it's been mislabeled. So the European countries of origin with the most food fraud is Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, Greece, and Poland. Things like this are going to be important when you start looking at how are we going to handle the mislabeling, how are we going to handle the food fraud. If we know which countries have the most food fraud, then we puts up a flag for us that we are going to pay attention to that. And I'm going to talk about how we do that in the US and how we do it in the EU. So the product categories that experience the most food fraud are the fats and oils, the fish and fish products, meat and meat products, fruits and vegetables, the poultry and poultry products. So when we start looking at how we're going to control food fraud, we're going to look at those products as possibilities that this is something we're going to have to deal with. Here we go. Food fraud. It occurs when the products are deliberately diluted, mislabeled, tampered with, or substituted. So we're going to say that 56% of the people say they're confident that what they're buying is exactly what's stated. But 92% say that it's important that local authorities test the food to make sure it is labeled. The problem is most local authorities do not have the capacity to be able to test all the food that comes in. And that's true of the US and of the EU. So there is a cost of food fraud. People are paying much more than what they need to pay for something that they're not getting. So the price is raised and we're not getting the availability of the food we want. The cost is being raised. And so the consumer is paying more per year for the food that they're doing. So it is good that we tackle food fraud because it's really safer for the consumers in the end, and that's who we're trying to protect. So what foods are the most susceptible? Obviously, milk is a very susceptible one. Quite often it's diluted, sometimes it's colored, even with plaster. Sometimes things are added to it so that the protein looks like it's higher. Olive oil, there's always been a lot of issues. Olive oil is an expensive product. It's limited. And so if it can be mixed with other things, it is one of the highest things that we have to look for. Honey, you've had this even in your own country with honey being diluted. I'm a beekeeper myself, and I like the fact that I have my own honey and I know where it comes from and I know the quality of it. But that's not always so true, because people are looking to use honey and then to find out that they might not be actually paying for what they're getting. Spices such as saffron. Saffron's there again, a very costly spice to purchase. And so it is a repeat victim of fraud. Fish. Quite often we think we're getting one type of fish and we're getting something that's of a lower quality, but paying the higher price. Coffee is the same way. It's an expensive product that if they dilute it with something as a filler, then we find out that we haven't actually gotten what we paid for. Orange juice. This has to do with the labeling. Is it 100% or is it diluted? The labeling might say it's 100%, but it actually isn't. And the same with apple juice. Apple juice has some problems, such as in Lebanon, because of some pesticide use from years ago. And then they're trying to deal with that. So the apple juice also is something that we look at. Black pepper, that's another spice. And so is the tea tree. The tea leaves is always a problem there. So these are the ones that are most susceptible to food fraud: the olive oil, the fish, the organic foods. It's false labeling. Unless you are certified organic, you are not to be able to put organic on your labeling and say that it is the quality of organic foods. But quite often people say, well, we just don't use any of the excess pesticides or whatever, so we should be able to put organic on there. The milk, the origin of that milk, the type of milk, how much butter fat does it have in it? Has it been diluted, or has it actually had a health problem, such as the adding of the melamine? The grains, what type of grains do we have? The quality of it. Rice sometimes is added, broken rice, different types of rice, modified organisms. We think that we're getting a certain quality, and we're not. We talked about the honeys, how they are adding sugars and syrups, if it's organic or not. The type of coffee and tea we have, is it Robusta, is it Arabica? The origin, the varieties. Wine is the same way, with origin and quality varieties. Spices are sometimes colored with illegal dyes. And fruit juices, are they what they're declared? Are they 100% apple or orange or whatever? Or are there other fruit juices in that and they've been diluted? So there are public health consequences. When you start putting industrial dyes into chili powder, when you put plasticizers in juices, teas, and jams, when you put peanut protein in cumin or spices, because that's an allergy that you're adding to that. So when you do things like that and you're altering what the composition is with things that are not foods, and it's hindering people's health. Okay, the outbreak with one of the highest mortality rates in history. was talked about 15 years ago in Canada. This happened with an outbreak, and we ended up losing a lot of elderly people, especially. It was a shortage. There is not a one size fits all when you look at Listeria. We find out that it was intransient, it's persistent, it's difficult because of the persistence of Listeria. It remains in the plant where things are. In this case, it was in a cheese plant. It'd been there for 7 years. And there was a need for improved sanitation because of the evidence. But even with improving the sanitation, it was not enough. So there was a deadly outbreak, and it really brought Canada to its knees of we needed to do something different. So there's an impact on businesses by food fraud. The consumer's trust. You have now come out and said that how many samples of your honey weren't fraudulent. They weren't what they said. The consumers paid the price for it, but it wasn't there. So now the consumer is going to lose some trust in the honey at the Philippines, and they're going to look at brands that are imported instead of buying from the beekeepers within the Philippines. So there are lost sales to your local beekeepers. And there has to be some crisis management to this, especially if there ends up being some health consequences of it. The impact on the consumers, most time food fraud's not helpful and not harmful, but there are notable exceptions to that. And especially when it comes to elderly and when it comes to infants and people who have autoimmune problems. So some of the recent examples of food fraud. There was the melamine that was detected in pet food that was imported into the US, and many dogs died of that. There was the melamine that was detected in powdered infant formula from China. We lost children. Many children in China died of that. By adding the melamine to it, it looked like the protein was high enough, even if the milk had been diluted, but it caused problems with the kidneys, kidney stones, and children were hospitalized. There was a salmonella outbreak that was linked to peanut butter in the United States. There was a big outpouring of, in the UK, beef seemed to not be as expensive as what it had been. They could sell it cheaper. And when they tested it, they found out that there was horse meat in the beef. Now, this didn't cause a health problem, but you didn't get what you purchased. So the horse meat issue in Europe has continued from the UK going across Europe, because horse meat is available in Europe, and it was easily added to beef to be able to sell for a cheaper price and sell in quantity. So we had candy poisonings, we've had contaminations in chocolates, we've had recalls of some of that. We actually even had toxic insecticide that was added to confectionaries. We had contamination of eggs. We've had listeria outbreaks, strawberry contamination. In the case of Australia, they actually had needles in it. Just recently, we had strawberry contamination that came from the soil and came from the water. And then the strawberries were quick frozen and sold in the supermarkets, and we're finding multiple cases of illness caused from it. Even from the strawberries being frozen, it did not kill the contamination. So when the berries are now eaten, people are ill from the contamination that was in the soil and in the water. So there's even the fact of like dioxins from the burning of plastics, then travels into an industry of food and into tofu. It was accumulated within the tofu industry. So sometimes it's not intentional at all, but it still happens. So you can see that there are many different ways. Here's something in the United States that we had ice cream. There was a trend that individuals, they thought it was a funny thing. And actually it ended up not being that funny because illness could pass from the people licking containers of ice cream, putting them back on, and then people would purchase the ice cream and it already had been contaminated. So sometimes it's just a prank that people are trying to do, but it does have consequences. Okay, we're looking at how food fraud happens. This is going to be some of the ways that we're going to look at how you can prevent food fraud. In this example, you can see how like fish is caught one place, it's processed in another place, then it's shipped someplace else. And so you can see that during this whole process, the label comes in as something totally different than what the whole process had been. It's interesting that it was caught on the coast, west coast of the US. It goes back to China. It's processed in different areas. It comes back and it's sold in Canada. So it looks, according to the label, you would assume that it had been caught and sold almost locally, only to find out it has had a large transportation route. And this is pretty normal in today's markets. It's because that we have all these different processes that the same product over a period of time has been shipped around. It's not, we have this large delivery system that goes from one part of the world to another part of the world. So there's a lot of food fraud that can happen within those changes. So these complex food supply chains, along with the challenging economic times, COVID-19 added to those economic times, makes an increasing pressure for suppliers to commit food fraud. And sometimes they're not really trying to be unscrupulous. It's just a matter of they're trying to make their commitments. So in this case, you can see like this chicken Kiev, and you'll see that part of that came from all over the world. Ireland did the same thing with a pizza. How many countries are all actively giving product just to put one pizza together? But at the same time, because companies have to make a profit, then they start looking for the least cost of where they can buy these supplies to put in so that the consumer still can purchase at the price that they're expecting. But our food supply is becoming more global, more complex, and it adds to more food fraud. So food frauds, it's a global problem. It doesn't matter where you look in the world, we are having issues with food fraud. And part of it for the same reasons we're talking about. Most of the time, it comes back to economics. So we have to look at this. There's food fraud, food defense, food quality, and food safety. Now, some of this is unintentional and some of it's intentional. Some of it can be accidental, foodborne illnesses that come from that, but it's totally accidental. It can be economically driven. The motivation is financial gain. It can be ideologically driven, and the motivation is harm, and that comes in your food defense. So we have to look at what was the reasoning that the food fraud happened, and did it actually end up causing a problem with the food quality or the food safety, and did it actually harm anyone? So these are the things we have to look at of how we're going to deal with food fraud. So here, I thought we had to split this up a little bit so you could see it, but I think it was really important. The difference between food defense, food fraud, and food safety. So food defense, we have to actually look at the intentional contamination. It was sabotage. It's for extortion. Sometimes it's a cyber crime. But we have to look at the food fraud as illegal processing or waste diversion. We were going to throw that away, but we could add it to it and we could utilize the waste. And so that becomes food fraud because we haven't labeled it as such. It can be an addition or a substitution. We can't get what we normally are used to, so we're going to substitute it for something else. We're going to dilute it because we have a high demand for a product and we can't meet that demand, so we dilute it. Or we counterfeit it, or we misrepresent it. We say that it's organic and it's not organic. There's a gray market theft. Okay, this has been left over. We utilized it, put it back on the market, and we sold it as something different than what we told them it was. So here it kind of explains a little bit more on the substitution. That's when you take an oil like sunflower or oil and you partially substitute it with mineral oil. We put hydrolyzed leather protein in milk so that it looks the same, but it's a substitution. We conceal things by putting harmful food coloring in. So the fresh fruit, fruit looks fresh, it covers the defects. We look at watered down products, we dilute them. Olive oil's diluted with toxic tea tree oil. Sometimes it's not toxic what we're diluting it with, but it's still not what we say that it is. We counterfeit it. We're using copies of popular food, and it's not produced in the same safety assurances of what the popular food is. It's unapproved enhancements. It's putting unauthorized additives, dyes, spices. The melamine was in that. The sale of excess unreported product is in the gray market. You've taken production, theft, diversion, and you're selling the excess of it. The mislabeling, it's expired and we're going to do it again. It has unsafe origins, but we're going to change the date on it and the labeling. It has toxic types in it. Instead of using what people are used to, we substitute it for something else, but we don't label it that way. We're recycling cooking oil, but we don't say it's recycled. We just say it's oil. So sometimes we use different ways to do the food fraud. So here it is, said organic. It wasn't organic. Exported meat. It wasn't safe meat. It had already started to spoil. Once when I was in Liberia, we had a meeting. We had basically all the constituents, from consumers to the government, to the processors, to the NGOs, universities. And we were talking about food laws, because at that time they did not have a food law. In fact, it hasn't been passed yet, but they've at least started and working on it. And one of the NGOs brought up the fact that there had been a shipment of chickens, and it had been refused at other ports because they had the laws and the rules, regulations, and they actually were able to test the meat, and they rejected it. Of course, whoever had sent that chicken decided they didn't want to just dump it. They wanted to get some money for it. So they took it to Liberia, who didn't have any food laws and didn't have a way of testing it, and dropped it off. So at that point, we realized it did not matter if you were with the government or you were a consumer from the street. You all were eating that same imported chicken that had been dropped off because nobody else wanted it. So sometimes we have fake branded food. This is where we take leftovers, things that have expired, we relabel it and we put it out that it's something of a popular brand when it's actually something that was just expired. So here, it's not honey. Almost all the honey that was tested had sugar syrup in it. And one of the things we didn't realize that this was deliberate, and Chinese companies have designed sugar syrup that can bypass the standard test. So health and livelihood of beekeepers are at risk. It's probably not a health risk to the consumer, but they're not getting what they said they are. And this is something else that we have to deal with, that the standard tests aren't going to tell us that it's already fraud. So here's food fraud in the Philippines. We found the study of how 82% of the honey brands are just completely purely sugar syrup. 75% are adulterated and not entirely honey. And so the local 87% of the local honey sold online is impure. Now, this is probably not something that's going to cause any health, but it's going to be detrimental to your honey producers because people have lost their confidence in it. Not only that, but there are countries like in the US, we have a ban on Egyptian honey because we found out that most of it had been adulterated. It was sugar syrup. It wasn't what we expected it to be. We brought it to their attention. It was a known thing. And in our country, it's not just the one import that we refuse. If we get enough from a country, then we say we're not buying from that country at all anymore. And the country we're purchasing from, like Egypt, will have to prove to us that they have put things in place so that when we purchase honey from them again, it will be what we expect that we're purchasing. But until that time, we won't be purchasing honey from that country. Here's on seafood. Now, there are different types of fraud within the seafood. We saw a little bit of that when we talked about how fish were caught on the west coast of the US, went to China, went around, come back, and was sold in Canada. So there's transshipment and transferring cargo around among different transport countries. It avoids the tariffs. The motivation is anti-dumping duties and stuff. And it compromises the storage, the handling, the traceability of that food. There can be over-treating of it because it hasn't maybe had enough ice on it. It hasn't had enough other things, but it improves the profits, and that's what they're looking for. The water may include pathogens as it's traveling around there, and they're putting different ice on it. Some of it's made from pond water, some of it's sanitary, and some of it's not. There can be a species substitution along that, a less costly species, and then misrepresented it as the more expensive. So it increased the profits, but it's misrepresented. It may be toxic. It may cause an allergic reaction. There can be a short weighing of it. There again, we can state that it weighs more than what it actually does, and it increased the profits. And the mislabeling. We might say that it's from a different country of origin. That is one of the things we're trying to do right now, is trying to figure out this country of origin, cool, we call it. Sometimes the US lost a case because of beef, country of origin, the way we wanted it. And so the US is looking, the FDA, USDA is looking at ways of how we're going to label our packaging of meat and fish to know where that actually came from so we can have more traceability and look at food fraud. So this is from the Codex Alimentarius, and Dr. Elliott has said that it's time we look for some fixed definitions of food fraud. There's a lot of variability in it, and we need a food supply system that produces safe food, produces nutritious food, produces authentic food that is free of fraudulent activity. And I think that is what we're all aiming for, and we're going to have to look together of how to get past the negative impact of food fraud and be able to have quality and safety aspects back in our food, because our consumers' confidence and business, it's harming our businesses. And so we need to find a way to put the confidence back in so the consumers trust our food businesses. So a food protection system, you have to look at the food safety, the food defense, and the food fraud. So we're looking at separate, but we can use some of the same techniques for all three of them. So here we're doing managing the threats and the vulnerabilities. We have to assess the threats. So we look at what the resource process is, we look at the knowledge, and we look at it multidisciplinarian. And that's why it's important that you have the food science, the technology, supply chain, human resources, the security information, all those things need to go together. And this is one of the reasons that we're looking at AI doing this, because of the huge amount of information and technology that we have available to us. How do we take all those different things with the rising cost of ingredients, the different productions that are being done, and how can we make sure that we understand and we know what's going on and food fraud isn't happening? We have to prioritize that. That can be pretty difficult when you look at the risk assessments traditionally, but we can do that by looking at what is considered the low food safety risk, what is a high food safety risk, and how can detection be done for food safety in food fraud. So we have to identify the controls and actions. This is one of the things that's very easy to tell companies and countries that they need to do more testing. Well, that takes time, it takes resources, and not all countries have it. And even if we did, we would have to test every piece of food that is coming into our country or being produced within our country. That's a lot of inspection, a lot of monitoring, and a lot of testing that needs to be done. So we need to find another way to do that, of how we could end up doing this at a least cost and actually fit what we have for capacity to do it. One of the things is we start looking at the ongoing resources. Are there any changes to ingredients, to suppliers, to country of origins, product formulations? Are there new and emerging food fraud risk? We have C-SPAN, we have a lot of different organizations that are international, that we can look at with our relationships, that we can actually look at some of the issues that are going on. When there's recalls, that's put out. One country lets all the other countries know that we have a recall and this is the issue that we're having with this. So it puts that information out there that this is a product or this is a country that we need to look at, that we might have problems with the food that's being imported into our country. So the FDA, it provides a list of refusals by countries and areas by product based on an industry code. And we called the Import Refusals Report an IRR. And you can look that up. It's updated monthly. It's open to the public. And we look at what that information is. If I am a processor in the US and I'm looking at importing, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to see which countries are being flagged for products with illegal colors or food additives, pesticide residues that aren't meeting tolerance levels. If you haven't supported sufficient evidence to be on the green list, I'm going to look at what the refusal reports are for what I'm interested in purchasing to see if we have some problems. So here's the import alerts for the Philippines. So I wanted to kind of go through this. And one of the things, this is for many different things, from fish to different seafoods, to different, there was even some in here that had to do with biscuits and things like that. One of the things that I wanted you to notice is that they appear to be misbranded. Some of them, they were decomposition in fish that probably have some histamine there that we have to worry about. That there was, so there was normal, but what I really wanted to show you was the import alert type. Every one of these, this was recently in the last, 2023, was with, they were detention without physical examination. So that was interesting. Some was with surveillance, meaning they looked at it, but they didn't test it. So none of these were actually physically tested to see if there was really something wrong with them. They made an assumption based on knowledge that they had accumulated that without physical examination, we were going to detain these. And so these are the ways the EU does the exact same thing. Almost 80% of the import food is rejected without physically testing it. So you don't have to have more resources, laboratory resources, people resources, to be able to start doing something towards the food fraud that you suspect. If you have the rules and regulations in place, which our rules and regulations and the EU's allows us to do an import alert and refuse that we haven't physically looked at it, but we refuse to accept it. Now, the way that you get past this, these companies would then have to respond and tell the USDA and show them that this had been tested and it was safe. But we put that burden back on the company instead of taking care of it ourselves because we do not have the capacity to do it. So here's an individual. This one was for biscuits, and it was coming from the Philippines. And as you can see, the misbranding, 3 different types of misbranding. One was the color, one was the ingredient list, and one was the nutrition label. So we looked at all 3 of those things, and I'm going to make an assumption, and I don't know that because I don't have this label in front of me. Quite often when it says appears to contain an artificial coloring and fails to bear labeling stating that fact, you might have used the EU on the label. The number, we don't use the number that the EU uses for coloring. Or we might have looked at it and said seems to be redder or yellower or whatever than we think that it probably should be without artificial coloring being added. Misbranding as far as the ingredients and the nutrition label. There probably is a lot of them here that the address was wrong. I do this for a lot of different countries. I was in Lebanon a couple years ago, and I was telling them about this, and I put up one of these codes like this, and it was actually for fruit juices, and it was all about labeling. He had about 2 pages of misbranding. And I wanted to point out to them that the importance of the labeling. And all of a sudden I had one gentleman stand up and say, "That's my business." And I thought, oh no, what have I done now? But actually he was very good about it. And he said, "I still have no idea. And I can tell you how much this cost me. I had to produce the food. I had to ship the food over. Then I get this letter and I have no idea how to make it right. And they destroy my food and I had to pay for it to be destroyed in your country. So I lost all this money and I still don't know what this means." So one of them was his address. And he said, "I know my address and that's my address. That's my legal address here." What he didn't realize that the way we have set it up in the US is you have to have a US address, meaning you have to have a street address and a zip code. They do not have street addresses in Lebanon. He said, "We don't have that." I said, "Well, you have to look at what the intent is." The intent is that if we had to find you, we had to go to your processing facility, we need to know where it is. So when you think about when you tell somebody your address, you probably tell them how to get to your business. It's just down from the church, it's by the waterfall, it's on the road to the next big city. So you put that on, that is the street that you are on to explain it. When it comes to the zip code, you look, there is an online US Postal Service zip code, and you find the zip code for the city that is closest to you within your country. So is it fair? We could say that it hinders trade. But the thing is, it's our way, the EU's way, and many countries' way of looking and being able to handle what is coming in the food that's being imported into our country with limited resources. So here is our DWPE. It's detention without taking samples or otherwise physically inspecting the commodity to actually demonstrate that the shipment somehow appears to violate our FDA and Cosmetic Act. If your product is detained without physical examination, you have the right to provide evidence to the FDA in an attempt to overcome the appearance of the violation. If you do not provide evidence to the FDA, or if the information you provide is not sufficient to overcome the appearance of the violation, your product is subject to refusal into the country. So it's one of those things that we have the option of looking at the history fraud of a country that is shipping something into our country. Has there been recurring fraud in the same product over a period of time? Is there a pattern of food fraud in growing, manufacturing country, number of legitimate reported incidents? It can point to us that there's an increased vulnerability to food fraud. So we will look at the food that's coming in and we will give it a DWPE and wait for you to show us, the company, that you have provided evidence that you are not in violation and this food is safe. So is there a lot of food that is being destroyed that is safe? Probably, but we put it on the label. Frank Yanis, who was number 2 in our FDA, once said that if the label isn't right, then probably the food isn't right. And I talked about that and I questioned that some, but the bottom line is we don't have the resources for a physical examination. And this is our way of anything that looks suspect that we can handle food fraud and keep a safe food coming into our country. So here's FDA refusals. We have misbranding, alteration, and just other, but you will find that misbranding continues to grow. And now it's about 80% that we're going to end up, because we're going to say that it looks like it's been altered or it was misbranded. And that's how we're going to reject it. The WHO, according to the SPS agreement, says that you have the right to apply measures to protect humans, animals, and plant life and health. It covers decrees, regulations, testing, inspection, certification, and approval procedures, along with packaging and labeling requirements directly related to the food. So your SPS agreement with WTO allows you to be able to put things in place of how it is best to protect the food that is imported into your country. So how to detect mislabeled foods? Well, we have our nutrition facts list, and although there is not any form that you can just fill out for our nutrition facts, there is specific ways that this has to be done on a label. It's the same thing in Canada, Mexico, EU, many different countries within the EU has their own labeling. And one of the reasons that is because that is their way to protect themselves in trade with food fraud. So here's the regulatory compliance review. So we could give this to one of our inspectors that's coming in, and we're going to say, you're going to look at the label. That's the first thing that you're going to look at. We're going to look at the statement of identity. We're going to look at the net content statement, the distribution. We're going to look at the claims that are put on that, the nutrition fact label, the ingredient statement, and then there's marketing terms and preparation instructions and things. Now, quite often, countries have an idea that these have to be on US labels. But the thing is they have to be in specific places, in specific fonts and size. So if you don't know those, then you wouldn't have the label right. And if it's not right, then that person that's at the dock is going to take a choice every so often and look, and he's going to know countries, certain countries that are shipping certain products in. He's going to take a look at it, and right away he's going to be able to see misbranding, non-compliance, and it'll be put to the side. He doesn't have to test it. He doesn't have to send it over to the laboratory. He doesn't have to do a lot of other things. He already knows when it comes on the dock, if this is suspect, that we have some concerns. Sometimes it's the month. You know, we know when certain products have more of a tendency to not be safe. And we know certain countries aren't doing things correctly that we might have had problems with in the past. So he's going to look first with the regulatory compliance of the label. So food fraud can lead to health issues, some major, even death. So depending on what's added, substituted, or left out, it can cause poisoning from spices. We just did spices in the US and found out that something like 97% of the spices that we have on our counters have heavy metals, and they have not been tested, and we have not been aware of that. We had some universities and the National Health Institute doing some testing. So now we are really concerned about that. And so the US, I'm sure, is going to start really looking at spices they're going to be forced to because the consumer is concerned. And when things are adulterated, we look at there's allergic reactions to things, and then the labeling isn't right either. So that is how we usually find some of them, like allergens, have to be on the label. It was pretty discerning to me. I just went through in Lebanon. I was there for 2 weeks working with 4 different companies, and I worked with all of their the people who were developing the graphic designers for the labels. And I was so specific on everything. And yesterday I got one of them back and said, would you please look at these labels that have been done? Oh yeah, we are aware they didn't put the allergen statement in, and they put something else with the net weight wrong. And it was like, we were so specific. People don't realize how important the label is in order to do trade. So the mislabeling can contribute to illness or cause deaths, and it's so important. The products might not be stringently checked or evaluated, but we are concerned about the bacteria and the allergens that are in that, and we're doing it a lot with just our labeling. So there's a public health alert. I get these almost every day. So it isn't just the imported food that we're doing. It's ready to eat food that is here. Here again, a public health alert. This had to do with an allergy to peanuts. We are so picky about this. I've been substitute teaching last year. Our elementary schools, our educational system is crying since COVID-19 for teachers. And so I was a substitute teacher. Most of our elementary schools have a sign on the door that no one can bring a product with peanuts into the school because we have such allergic reactions in our children that they are hospitalized. So it's on the door. You can't send a peanut butter and jam sandwich with your child to school anymore for fear that a child who has a peanut allergy will end up getting into the peanuts. So here's new labeling rules for Canada. These are going to be required on high sodium or saturated fat. It's going to be determined if it is high in salt, sugar, or saturated fats. If it exceeds these thresholds, you're going to have this special label put on the top for the consumer to know for their health. They're trying to have healthy eating strategies, and it's going to be determined based on different guidelines. So if this is not on a food that we know has salt, sugar, or saturated fat in it, Canada is going to reject that food at the port. Import alerts prevent potentially volatile products from being distributed in the United States. We have a concern, so there's an import alert. It frees up agency resources to examine other shipments. It provides uniform coverage across the country, and it places the responsibility back on the importer to ensure that the products being imported into the United States are in compliance with the FDA's laws and regulations. This is the same reason that Canada, the EU countries, they're using import alerts so that the resources that they have go into testing the food within the country and being able to put that responsibility back on the country that's bringing the food in. So here, the FDA issues the guidance on refusal of inspection by foreign food establishments. We have it so that we're supposed to be able to go and do an inspection We can go anywhere in the world and where the food supply is and ask for an inspection of that foreign food facility to make sure that there's food safety is being done there and that our concerns are met. Our FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, gives the FDA authority to refuse entry of food offered for importation into the U.S. if the foreign food establishment or the foreign government has refused to permit the FDA to inspect the foreign establishment that produced the food. Now, quite often, the FDA is not the one that's going to do this. It's going to be the company that is accepting the supplies from a foreign country. But if it's a ready to eat and it's ready to be put on the shelf, then it is the FDA that's going to do that. So this is our voluntary pilot program to evaluate third-party food safety standards. This was just done last week. And so we're announcing the voluntary pilot program to evaluate the alignment of private third-party food safety audit standards with the food safety requirements. Buyers and others in the food chain often use third-party audits to assess the quality and safety of a product. So this way we can send third-party audits to go in here. Buyers such as importers, receiving facilities might stipulate an audit as part of the purchase agreement. We want an independent third-party audit to tell us that it verifies the activities that are being done by the supplier, that food safety is being met within the confines of those businesses. So food standards is focus, even in Canada. Someone needs to target in terms of food safety. Standards provide a good place to start and allow people to set up the framework. There are hundreds of guidelines. This is one of the things that we seem to forget about sometimes, that the Codex Alimentarius has the standards. The US has very few food safety standards, and some of them are out of date. So when it comes to trade, it is the Codex standards that are going to be used for trade. Yes, for us to accept the food, we can put stipulations on, but when it comes to the standards for trade, that is always the Codex. It will tell you the quantitative standards, like the maximum levels for contaminants and food additives, residue limits for pesticides. The science is available. It is there. There are 5 key elements to building those standards: clarity, engagement, science, the expected outcome, and having the patience to do it. I can't believe how many countries I have been to, and I talk about their HACCP plans. And they say, well, we don't really have the capacity to do all the testing to figure out all the standards we need and what are our critical controls and our controls. And I said, that's already done for you. All you have to do is go to the Codex Alimentarius, look up what you're trying to do, whether it's sweet pickles, whether it's cassava, whether it's fish, no matter what you're trying to do, the standard is there. It will tell you what the critical control points are. It will tell you what the maximum levels are, what you need to test for, and what the concerns are. It's already written for you to put into the HACCP plan. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's there. So we need a global governance of food safety, and it's needed urgently because unsafe food causes more than 200 different diseases. 600 million, almost 1 in 10 in the world, get sick after eating contaminated food. And 420,000 die every year. Children under 5 are the ones who carry 40% of the foodborne disease burden, with 125,000 deaths every year. children are very susceptible to unsafe food. So one of the things we need to look at, it is the farmer's job to grow the food. It is the producer's job to produce good food. It's the government's job to ensure that the food is good. It's the universities and the NGOs' job to teach about good food. And it's the consumer's right to eat good food. And that's why we're here, and we're trying to figure out how to get there. We all have a part in making sure that the food that is available to the population is safe, nutritious food. And this is one of the things with Global Gap that is bringing this. Used to be HACCP plans were just for the producer. Now with Global Gap, we're going back to, it's the farmer that needs to start here. We need to know that the soil is safe. We need to know that the water is safe. This is becoming more and more important. I was in Guyana in February, and they have lots of fresh water available. They have a beautiful system of the whole thing, but the water isn't safe, and it's in canals. And how do you protect that and make it safe for food production? Brazil, right next door to them, has taken over some of the concern and said, we will not purchase any greens, such as your salad greens and sprouts and things like that, unless it is grown in a greenhouse, because they do not believe that being done in the fields, because there's open fields, the animals that are there, the water contamination that is happening, they don't believe that they can control it anymore. So it has to be done in a greenhouse, or you cannot sell that product. So this is my biography, which was read to you, I think, at the beginning, but the reality is why I wanted to do this is the next slide. I don't have control of my slides. Okay. Was because I want to offer, which I have been doing for other countries, and I haven't been to the Philippines yet, that there can be a food labeling course for the food industry and the regulatory personnel. And we can talk about some of these topics that are here and how to be in compliance, but also how to look at the import-export issues of how to utilize your resources the best way that we possibly can. So this can be done in country. Usually it's done through a university. And I'm thinking in the past, we have done like lectures like this and gone through, but it takes so much more to actually get down to the implementation. It's the things we don't know. You can have lots of rules, regulations, laws, but until you actually look at how they can be implemented and how it can solve the issues, they don't do us a lot of good. So it usually takes a longer time for us to sit down, actually go over that, because your culture is also important to it. This isn't a one size fits all. Once in Egypt, I was there and I was in a chicken processing, and we were going through the HACCP and then going on. Hopefully they wanted to get on the approval list for export. And so it's like, whoa, I walked in and there was all these things that I could see that even just for food safety issues, we had to be concerned with. And so I started talking to them and realized they didn't have a HACCP plan. They had one that they had bought, but it didn't fit with what they were doing or their layout at all. So I said, okay, let's get together. We took one person from each area of the processing and said, let's talk about this. What is it that we need to do? And so I started with a simple thing like, okay, you can't wear jewelry in the processing area. There's too much mechanical there with too many possibilities of injury and contamination of the food. And immediately I was told that I was trying to make the men unmarried. And I said, believe me, that has nothing to do with this. But what I found out is we give all these rules and regulations and all the compliance that we want from the companies that are producing in the countries of how we want the food done for us to purchase it without an understanding of why we're asking it. So once I said, instead of me telling you what you should do, let me tell you why we need some of this, and you come up with the way that you're going to meet the compliance within your culture, and you know that you are compliant with what the purpose of the rules and the regulations are. And I think that's something we don't do enough, is involve the people of how to be compliant. I know I just taught this class and I had a lot of people. In fact, I had them from South Africa, Mexico, Canada, as well as the United States. And they said that as companies, they constantly are told that you ask a lot of things of us and they don't make sense. And for the first time in the class, these people who were in the business of asking that of their suppliers said, I never understood why they said that. I thought they were just being funny with us. And I said, no, we ask for these things to be compliant, but we don't tell them why, what we're trying to achieve. And in different cultures, it means different things. In Egypt, I guess it was in Lebanon. I've been working there for 4 years. And this last time, just last month, I went from business to business, and constantly I would start with the HACCP and I would say, okay, you need to clean, you need to sanitize. And I'd get everybody shaking their head, yes. But the reality is I wasn't seeing it. So my last day, I was at the hotel, and I've always stayed this place, and usually there's only 2 or 3 people there. So I know the chef quite well, and he has taught me how to make some of the local recipes and stuff that I like. And I went up to him and I said, maybe you could help me with this. You're in food. This is the problem I'm having. And I said, I keep telling them, are you cleaning? Are you sanitizing? They all shake their head, yes. And it's not happening. And he said, well, because it's the same word in Arabic. I said, what do you mean it's the same word? He said, well, when you say clean and sanitizing, that is one word. And so they're doing one thing. I said, it's a 2-step process. Then you have to use a different word. So you have to say something like it's cleaning and disinfecting. He said, then you got 2 words. So I went back to the office, and, they had been handling this project for 4 years. And I told him what I'd been through. And he looked at me and he goes, yeah, what are the 2? It's 2 steps. What are the 2 steps? And I went, oh no, we have been doing this for 4 years. And the people implementing the project didn't know that we were talking about a 2-step program at the very basic of hygiene. So we really need to get people together. We think you're hearing, but people aren't hearing. We think we're sharing, and we're really not, because we're not engaging enough to find out what is really happening.
Right. I think, Christine, that ends your
Yes, it
slide.
does.
Yeah.
So now we can take
All right. And thank you
questions.
so much. Let me just share our main presentation for this. All right. So before we go into the questions from our participants, let me just briefly summarize, or I guess put in a few aha moments from Miss Christine Blackledge presentation. So let's give her a round of applause first, a virtual applause, I guess, for well done and well presented information and discussion on food fraud. Okay. And again, for anyone who has questions, you may please leave them in the chat box, in our Q&A box, and we'll have Christine answer them later. Okay, but meanwhile, if I would give a few aha moments or new things that I have had um, gathered from the discussion, and I believe some of you might share the same new information or aha moments with me, is that food fraud is indeed a global problem, but let's not think of it as responding to food fraud as an arms race, that one country has better ways of detecting food fraud than others, and they're the best country in the world when it comes to food fraud. So again, looking at food safety and the way that we look at food fraud also, it's everyone's responsibility, and it's not an arms race of some sort. So each of us has equal capabilities when it comes to responding to food fraud. And let's um, change this notion that developed countries around the world are better when it comes to food fraud prevention, when in fact all of us has again that same problem, that despite having probably more advanced technologies or more advanced methods for detecting food fraud, they still have food fraud as a problem, in the same way that we here in the Philippines have the same problem when it comes to food fraud. So really, it's not really on how much technology that you have or how much you are really invested on equipment and methods in food fraud prevention, but it's really in addressing the root cause of food fraud. Okay, so the testing is not the answer, that we have to increase testing capacity or we have to be aggressive in enforcing rules, but rather let's address the root of the problem, and testing would be the last resort when it comes to food fraud prevention. And a highlight of Miss Christine's discussion would be on labeling, and I think the others would share the sentiment, is that labeling is something of a low cost but high impact way of addressing or mitigating food fraud. And Christine has given us insights on different food labeling methods or labeling guidelines that could help us mitigate food fraud. Okay. So we're waiting for a few more questions in our chat box, and Christine, if you would may if I'll ask a few questions of my own, would that be okay before I go with the chat box questions, as we still collect some few questions? Christine?
Okay.
All right. Well, first, more of a clarification, but you've mentioned that food fraud is a governing definition, or yeah, a governing definition of food fraud is there's intention or there's economic gain coming from it. Now, to clarify, would a person allowing the release of a non-compliant product, let's say it failed microbiological testing, would that be a food fraud activity in itself, since there's also a perceived economic benefit for releasing that product?
Oh, definitely. And depending on what the testing was for, it could be a real health. Failed the test for pesticide residue. It failed the test for salmonella. It failed the test for listeria. Those are things that are very important. If it failed the test because the pH wasn't high enough or the temperature hadn't been reached, food might be good at that time, but given a shelf life, by the time that happens, then salmonella, listeria might be growing because you didn't meet the critical control points in the processing of that food. So, I think one of the things we have to look at with food fraud is we have to look at why is it happening? Yes, there are those deliberate acts, there is choices that are being made, such in your example there. But there are also sometimes, and this is what I have run into more often than not, is people are, there's a short supply of something, or they got a
Yeah.
large order and they're trying to do it, and there's a shortage of the raw ingredients, or all of a sudden there was, a crop failure or something like that. And they're trying to find a way of what can they put in that. And, it's just like when your mother was cooking or whatever. Oh, we don't have that spice, or we don't have that. We could add this to the pot,
Mhm.
and it would still be good, type of thing. But then we forget that we have to change the label. We have to be able to say what we did, so there isn't food fraud. But if you don't tell them that you substituted something, then it's food fraud. The customer isn't getting what he thinks he's supposed to be getting.
I see. So, does it mean that for anything that has had some form of decision, let's say, yes, you've mentioned substitution, it's something that should be really informed to consumers, and
Yeah,
yeah.
that's why
So,
labeling is,
mhm,
labeling basically is about letting the consumer know what they are purchasing. It's like when I go to do one of the big things when you go to a foreign country, which is to get the label right, which is really hard if you're not there, and if you're not familiar with the culture that you're sending the food to. Is the label is to tell the consumer where the purchase is happening, what they are purchasing. So like a common name has to be there. So where it's being produced, it might be very common and it by XYZ. But if you're going to take that food and you're going to ship it to another country, it has to be on the label in a common name, so that person purchasing it at the store knows what they are buying. So
mhm,
you
mhm.
can't call it what you call it at home. You have to figure out what would they know it as where you're trying to sell it.
I see. Thank you, Christine, for that. And another clarification, I think, for the benefit of our participants here as well. When you say gray market, what do we mean by this?
The gray market is there is food that has been on the shelf and
Mhm.
has been removed because it was expired. And so you could sell it like what we call a scratch and dent store. We know that it's expired, but we know it's still probably good. And so you're not going to get a premium price for it. You're going to buy it at discount because, the spice is over the normal age of it, or the things that have been canned or whatever and have a longer shelf life, but really the label that was on it has expired. And so now you decide you're going to take that same food that has expired. It's probably still good, but it probably isn't as fresh as it should be, and you're going to put a new label on it as if it was just produced and it's fresh off the processing.
All right. Thanks, Christine. And I think another question related to this gray market is during the pandemic, we've seen shuttered restaurants, and some of the raw materials from these restaurants are actually repackaged and sold as, chicken
Yep.
nuggets of this certain brand. And look, one of the key question here is, let's say, for example, someone sold nuggets branded as I don't know, chicken nuggets from a certain fast food company, let's say, and it's not really that fast food company's nuggets, chicken nuggets, but they're selling it off as their brand. So who gets the fault there?
Well,
Is it the brand or the seller, or how does
it's
this
the
work?
seller, because
Mhm,
the brand doesn't know that they're even doing it. They're
mhm,
trying
mhm.
to get a higher price for something of a lower quality. And by relabeling it and using a known brand, that means then the customer is going to think, and it might not be exactly like the known brand, but it's enough like it that the customer, the minute it sees it, says, oh, I know that brand, and buys it as that brand, knowing without knowing it isn't. And sometimes when you get it home as a customer, you go, wow, that's not exactly like the brand that I'm used to. But it's too late. They've already purchased it. So the person who repackaged it, they knew what they were doing. They were using a switch and bait kind of thing of a brand that the customer might identify with and be able and be willing to pay more money for it.
Mhm, mhm. Right. Thank you for that, Christine. And I'll go over some of the chat box question while I also organize some of my questions here. But the first question here is more of a clarification question, I believe. Given the realities of dilution, substitution, mislabeling, and other food fraud related concerns, who will check and monitor these? And what sort of certification from origin needs to be added? And are there any pre-export check mechanisms to protect consumers from these food fraud activities or food fraudulent activities, rather?
Well, there can be in different ways. I think it has to be a multi look at
Mhm.
situations. I think like when you start collecting the data for food fraud, you're going to look at, you're going to know, is there a shortage of ingredients for products that are made in your country? Has there been a price change in products that is used for the production? Is there an excess of raw ingredient available? Look at, okay, if all of a sudden I have a lot more of a certain spice on the market available, but we really don't have any more area that's growing that spice, you might say, maybe there's some food fraud here because all of a sudden we have a large supply, but we're not growing anymore here. And your Ministry of Ag would probably know that. Are things being sold below market price? All of a sudden they're willing to sell honey much cheaper than what it's been on the market. Is there a demand being made of suppliers for certain, to reduce their cost on certain things? Is food being sourced from an unusual growing area or climate or country, something like that? Are you finding when you do testing, is there allergens or bacteria that are detected that's not typical of that product? You expect to find aflatoxins in nuts and things like that. What if all of a sudden you're finding more listeria in it or something like that? Then you go, this isn't normal. We need to look at this. So that's why, like in the US, we have the USDA, we have the FDA, we have the ECA. We have all these different organizations that are looking at it. The National Health Association, all of a sudden they're looking at the numbers that we have more listeria problems. We have, what are the numbers changing? Then you look at that and you go, okay, do we have food fraud here and what is causing it? So that's where AI is going to come in as a positive in the future, is because it's going to be sorting through this information of what is unusual, which will help us determine what we're looking at here when it comes to food fraud and how we can help our industries make decisions. If you know that there's a shortfall of some raw ingredient, and you know that this is something that processors in your country are using, then you should be proactive and telling them that we understand, and maybe there is a substitute that they could use, a safe substitute that can be put on the label. It still is the same substance that they're doing, but you've substituted and you have to put that on the label. And then you don't have food fraud. You've taken care of a problem.
Thank you, Christine, for responding to that query. But I think also related to this query is who has the burden of testing authenticity? Is it the government? Is it the producers or the manufacturers themselves? Who has
Well,
that
that
burden?
depends.
Mhm.
When food is exported from your country, your national laboratory is responsible for
Mhm.
giving the certification that the food is safe.
All
So
right.
that is what, but basically, when a processor in my country is purchasing raw material from a source in your country, we are expecting the supplier to have tested it and told us what it is. Did it
Mhm.
have any issues? What is the protein level? Were there any oddities to it? We expect them to do it. And that is why the US just recently, as of last week, is saying we want the processor to take responsibility. And we also we're not going to go to the government and say, do these processors, are they following HACCP? Is their facilities producing safe food? We're going to go to the processor. And if we're really concerned, we're going to say we want a third-party audit that we
Mhm.
agree with, that will audit your facility to make sure that you are putting in the proper protocols. And we want that facility to be responsible for the food that they produce. Because I think, the USDA, the FDA, they know that they have limitations in the capacities to do this stuff. They know your government has limited, but they believe that if we are going to purchase from producers and they're making money from doing
Yeah.
this, that
Mhm.
they should be responsible, and we should have a way to verify that they are being responsible in the food that they're sending us. That's why we're rejecting it without examination. But then we're not going to the government. We won't go to the government unless this happens multiple times with multiple countries. Then we can put them on the blacklist and say, we're just not taking honey from the Philippines anymore until your government can put something in place that we know that the honey we're buying from you is going to be good. But
I
otherwise, we're
see.
putting the responsibility on the producers.
Mhm. The producers, I think, just to echo, the producers having the economic benefit from selling the food really does have the greater responsibility when it comes to ensuring the food safety of their product. Yeah.
Right.
All right. I'll go with the next question here.
Ziggy, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I just have to chime in. I think some of our participants here, attendees, would like to ask Christine a live question. So you
Ah,
can just,
mhm.
yeah, you can just raise your hand. You can just click on the raise hand button so we can acknowledge you and allow you to unmute yourself. So if
Mhm.
you'd like to, so I think that would be good that Christine could also hear from our attendees coming from different parts of the country.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would enjoy that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Right.
think
Yes,
I
Jenny.
saw a hand a while ago. It's Mr. Ferdinand I think it was Sir Ferdinand Caraballo. Do you still have questions for Miss Christine here? Uh, Let me just quickly scroll down my screen. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I th- mhm. Yeah, and I think Sir Ferdinand was the first one that we asked. His question was the first one we asked. He has a question in our Q&A box.
Did he feel like the
I think
question got
we were able.
answered,
Yeah,
Ziggy?
it was already
Mhm.
answered.
But does
I-
he feel it got answered? Sometimes I think I answer a question, but it's not what they really were looking for. So don't have them hesitate to say, I would like more of an explanation on that. And I might say, I don't know, but at least I want to make sure that they felt that their question was answered appropriately.
yeah, it's answered enough, ma'am. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. And we'll proceed with the next question. Here is here, in case we have a surplus of raw materials and it is expiring, the supplier was able to provide a letter of guarantee and shelf life studies that the raw materials available are okay to have an extended shelf life. Would that be considered food fraud? I think if this is something informed. Christine, your thoughts on this one?
Well, it would depend on how it was marketed. If they knew that the shelf life was expiring on it, and they turned around and packaged it and re-extended the shelf life as if it wasn't running out, then they're not telling the customer what they really have there. Now, if it is a raw material and they're talking to a supplier, you know, if they tell the supplier, look, we can give you a price break, we have this, and yes, it's about to expire, but we've tested it and it's fine, and we're willing to purchase it at that, then that's fine. That's not food fraud. You've been upfront about the whole thing. But on the other hand, if you take that product and you put a label on it with a longer expiration as if it was something that was just grown or processed, then you're not being, and you're going to get the higher price, then that is food fraud because you haven't been honest with the customer, whether it's the consumer or a different processor, of what you're actually trying to do with that food.
All right. Thank you, Christine, for that. And I think the emphasis here is honesty is the best policy.
Yes.
So if you are honest with what you are putting in the food and the declarations that you have on it, there's no need to be afraid of or for any
Yeah, it's
legal
mostly a
repercussions on
labeling
that.
and an honesty type of situation. It's when you are being dishonest to increase your profit margin is usually when you're in trouble, because you're walking a very fine line then, and you're not being totally, but you're making the profit, you're increasing the profit. Now, you could have something that's about ready to expire, and for whatever reason, there's a shortage of that material. You know, it's not being produced, it's an off season or whatever is causing that it is a hard product to get at that time. And the consumer or the buyer might be willing to pay a higher price for it because they can't get any more. So even if it is older, it still might be worth the price to them. But it's a matter of that you've told them of exactly what the product is that they are purchasing.
Yeah. At the back of my mind, I was thinking this business mindset that if it's high risk, it would always have high returns. But that's not applicable when it comes to food safety and food fraud, everyone.
No, it's kind of the inverse.
Yeah, please don't apply it to food safety and food fraud.
No, don't apply that.
All right. Our next question is from Logeline Sangir. And she asks, mislabel or improper labeling is a food fraud act. So if somebody is caught as such, would this mean they'll be blacklisted in the market forever? Or is this something of a First warning, second warning, and third warning, you're blacklisted, kind of thing.
That is basically what you're doing. When I was in Liberia, they had a lot of issues with especially fish. And
Mhm.
they had the equipment, but they weren't utilizing, and they did not have the food law in place yet. So they had a different procedure of shipping the fish over without actually utilizing the equipment to test it, the laboratory equipment. And so it kept getting denied. And the government was not concerned because what the producers were doing is when the company would be blacklisted after 3 or 4 times, we wouldn't take
Mhm.
theirs anymore. Then they would just change the name of the company. So the government really wasn't concerned because they could still sell fish. They just kept changing names. And so I told the government we were trying to get Codex started there, and it was a real transitional time for them. I said, if this keeps happening, we aren't going to take any fish, and neither is the EU from Liberia. The whole country is going to be. And they went, what? Well, it was, and I did not know, I had no insight into this. I just told them it could happen. And it was the very same week that's exactly what did happen. And then the government was concerned, and it was like, what can we do? I said, well, now you're going to have to go through the procedures, and it's going to take longer, and you are going to have to prove that you have put things in place. And then the government, the country, is responsible for getting them off the list, not just the processors. So that's where it goes from being a processor issue to a government issue. So that's, we expect that the government is going to have the capacity to make sure that the food that is being shipped from your country is safe, and that you are aware that there's been some issues. And once the country is put on the blacklist, then you're going to have things in place, and you're going to have to verify it, and you're going to take multiple times of shipping it and we're going to test it to verify that what you're telling us is true, so that we can eventually get you off the blacklist. But it takes time then. So yeah, a company can be rejected. It's just like that being detained without physical examination. We will not destroy that food immediately. Instead, we're going to send you a letter, and the processor has the capacity to send back the test that he took it to the national lab, and this has been tested and it is safe. And so then we're going to say, okay, it has been verified and we're not going to destroy it. We might go ahead, let it into the country. If it is a labeling issue or something, we're going to say you have to relabel it. But at least if it's because we are concerned that it's safe, you prove to us that it's safe, and we'll take you off the list.
Right. I hope that answered the question, Ms. Logeline.
Ziggy,
Please
we
let us
had,
know.
yeah, I'm sorry. Hello.
Yeah, Jenny, we can hear you.
Okay, I think we can get a question from
Yes,
one of
Jenny.
we
Uh-huh.
have a question from one of the participants, Christine.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna unmute his microphone. His name is Raymark Boris. Hi, Mr. Raymark. You may now ask your question to Christine. Mr. Raymark Boris. Or did you just chat in or type in your question? Hello, Mr. Raymark.
Sorry po ma'am, napindot lang po.
Ah,
Wala
okay.
na po akong question. Ayan, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Perhaps we can just move on to the next question, Christine. I think this one is a little bit technical, but can you please expound on the differences between FDA Food Defense Plan Builder versus Carver plus Shock and TACIP, PAS 96?
I didn't hear that for sure. It cut out a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Someone was asking about the difference between FDA Food Defense Plan Builder versus the Carver plus Shock and TACCIP, TACCP, PAS 96.
Oh, well, I'm not sure that I can do the whole thing, to be honest. They, in a way, complement each other. They're basically saying that if you have the HISAP plan in place, then you are providing safe food and you are having a defense against food fraud because you followed the plan through. You do food defense the same way that you do your HACCP planning. What is it? Where are the weak structures within your processing or within your plan where food fraud can happen? Is it your suppliers that are giving you the raw material? Is it within the processing yourself? Is it in the transportation of it? So when you do the food defense, you're doing a broader spectrum because you're including the transportation, your third parties who are purchasing it and redistributing it, where the HACCP is basically what can happen within your processing plan of the food. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I'm sorry, I couldn't read the name because it says here it's an anonymous attendee. Yeah, but I hope that answered his question or her question.
And I
yeah.
think if
Go ahead,
they have
Vivian.
any further questions regarding the FDA Food Defense Plan Builder and Carver Shock and TACCIP, they may email directly Christine, and she'll be more than happy to respond on
Sure,
that
I'll be
one.
more than happy to do that if they're looking for, more detail in the whole thing.
Thank you, Christine. All right. We have a question here. Apologies. The question is about a recommended brand of honey in the Philippines. Apologies, we cannot answer this are lest we are tagged as endorsing a certain product. So apologies, we cannot answer this one. The next question is it possible to
Go
release
buy from
public?
your local beekeeper.
Yeah, I think that's the best recommendation. Buy from a local beekeeper.
Know
Perhaps
your supplier.
Or perhaps they can
and
just get it straight from the beehive.
yeah.
Well, not unless you have a veil.
The full PPE. Yeah. Though just to share, here in the Philippines, I've encountered honey that are labeled as such. They say in their label honey, and then there's a sub label or a fine print flavored syrup. So they usually pass it as honey. Then there's that small text that says flavored syrup, just to say that it's honey. Then you'll see the price. It's really cheaper as compared to pure honey variants. So more of a like, let's read the label properly for those who are asking what are the best products of certain kind of brands. Um, for now,
There
the best.
again, that is
Mhm.
maybe, the labeling laws. With FSMA, labeling laws became much tighter of what had to be on that label so that the customer was not misled, even to the point the pictures had to be considered more. It used to be like you were going to buy a product that was part that you would make something larger from. And it was like then thought that that could be mislabeling because everything in the picture was not in the container. You only could have the picture of what was in the container, because otherwise you might mislead the consumer that was trying to buy the product. So I think when you start talking about, oh, in small print, there's this or that, well, we have to put on now that it is imitation, or it is a substance resembling, or whatever. And it has to be in the same size font as the name on it. So you can make the label much more safe against the food fraud by demanding how that label has to be written, so that your consumer knows what they are purchasing and they're not being tricked.
Thank you, Christine. And I think this is also something to look into by our regulators joining us here in the Zoom. Right, so we'll be asking the remaining questions here in our Q&A box. So first one is it possible to release public advisories regarding matters of food fraud, or does it need the consent of the company or the manufacturer?
Repeat that question. I'm not quite sure what they're asking me.
I think what they're trying to say is, let's say the regulations or the regulators were able to detect something from a certain product that it has undergone fraudulent activities, or it was probably something was substituted to it. Could the government or the regulators announce it to the public, or do they need to seek the consent of the company involved before they release the advisory to the public?
That that depends on how your food laws are written. In the US, it is available, such as I showed you, the Philippines, and that for misbranding, mislabeling, we rejected food. We don't have to ask their permission for that. That was a decision that was made on that food from that company. And I can get into every rejection that we do with every country and product that comes into this country. So nobody needs to have permission for that. And just like when I said I had that pop-up that this ready-to-eat food, there was questions about it. Sometimes it'll say, well, I think everything has been sold off the shelf, but if you have this in your home, this product, please destroy it or take it back to the store that you bought it in. Those warnings do, obviously they have to let the business know, but once they have notified the business, then it is public information. And the business can say, oh, we didn't ever get the letter or whatever. And we said, it was sent. And it is, because it's always about the customer are knowing what is going on and what is safe. It's for their benefit. It's not for, we look at this, that labeling in food is for the benefit of the customer, not for the benefit of the processor.
Right. Right. So I hope that also addresses the question, and I hope we have also, for the manufacturers that we have here in the Zoom, probably a bit of a shift on perspective, that we're doing labeling not for ourselves to, yes, it has that aspect of marketing, but the ultimate goal of labeling is to really have make consumers have informed decisions. So I hope that's a clear
Well,
clear
labeling
statement.
labeling comes after, under your government's laws. Food labeling is under food safety of your Food and Drug Administration. And so their concern is that the consumer knows what they are purchasing. And so that takes it away from marketing. Marketing is what the producer does, but the government is under protecting consumers. So in a way, one is under the other, but that is what it is the government's responsibility to make sure that the public has safe food. And that doesn't say anything about, they make the rules and the regulations for the producer to make sure that the producer is producing good food.
Mhm.
But the government has to be concerned about the consumer knowing what they're purchasing and that it's safe.
Right. Thank you, Christine. And just a few more questions. I think we have 3 more questions here in our Q&A box. So the first one is, do we have rapid kits to detect food fraud or food fraud types?
Yeah, there are
Rap-
some there are kits for, depending on what the food fraud is.
Mhm.
When it comes to small and medium-sized businesses, we know that there are certain contaminants that you don't even really need to know the level, because the level should be almost zero. Salmonella is going to be one of the biggest bacterial contaminations concerns that we have. So if I was a small to medium business, I would say, okay, I'm going to get a rapid test and I need to know about salmonella. Maybe I do low acid and I need to know about botulism. So I don't need a big laboratory that I need to know the levels of that, because I know the levels need to be zero. So I just need a rapid test to tell me, is it present or isn't it present? So yeah, on some things, it's pretty easy to do that. I mean, there are other things that obviously we're going to have to look at, testing for specific things. It depends on what you're producing.
I see. Thank you, Christine. I hope that answered also the question from our anonymous attendee. And then we have from Mr. Paquito. Can a product already shipped to the US and detained be tested in the US to see if it complies with the standards?
So what you're saying is you're not going to test it in the Philippines. You're going to wait till you test it in the US?
I think from Mr. Paquito, if you would like to clarify this question.
Not sure if he can hear you, Ziggy. I don't see his hand raised.
I see. All right. But I think from what I could understand from his question, Christine, that's that's I think what he's trying to ask is he already was able to ship a product to the US, and what happened to the product? It was detained in the US, and it will be tested in the US to check if it complies to the standards.
If he already has approval from your Food and Drug Administration that his products have been tested, and then you want a third-party independent test in the US to verify that, you can do that.
I think he has a clarification here. It was not tested from the country of origin.
And you have to have something from your national laboratory that allows you to export to another country.
Yeah. So I hope
the case is like in Lebanon, they do not have a national laboratory that has capacity to test food leaving from Lebanon. So their government is pretty weak at the moment, almost non-existent in some things. As far as the national laboratory, it is non-existent. And so the EU and the US gave the Chamber of Commerce's in the different districts laboratory capacities, and the laboratory that is certified, it has to be a certified laboratory in your country, And so those laboratories that have been given to the Chamber of Commerce's have been certified. So when a company wants to export from Lebanon, they take it to the Chamber of Commerce's, and then they give the certification to the processor to export, because you have to have a certification from your country for exportation. Because just like what we were talking about before, if there is a huge problem, it is your country's responsibility to make sure that the food being produced in your country is safe.
Right. Thank you, Christine. Apologies for the others. We're quite pressed for time, so we'll be just limiting it to last two questions for Miss Christine. It's also a bit late on her time zone. So
Yeah.
let's have first the live question from Miss Edna Bado. Miss Edna, please, if you would. Miss Edna. She's raising her hand, but I think she's unable to mute.
I've actually unmuted her. I'm asking her to unmute her microphone, but yeah, perhaps while waiting, Ziki, perhaps we can answer this next question. I think this is very interesting from Mr. John Aquino.
Yeah, I would share the same question with John Gregory here. He's asking, in the advent of lab-grown meat, we also have meat alternatives, food printing, and other emerging food technologies. What are the potential food fraud or food fraudulent activities that we need to consider here? Is this something that should be addressed, since these are all emerging food technologies?
Well, they are. Actually, Codex Alimentarius is addressing some of these new technologies of lab-grown meats, foods, things like that. So I think we're looking towards, I mean, obviously every country is going to look at this in some shape. But I think we're all looking for trade. Those standards have to come from Codex Alimentarius. So it's like if your country has, even if it's not new, maybe it's an old food that is standard, it's a regional food of your country, and you want to export it, you have to have a standard. We have to have a standard within Codex Alimentarius of that food. So many countries now are working on this. This morning, I gave a talk to an international group at Michigan State, and we were talking about how they weren't really into the Codex Alimentarius of participation, but they had foods that they wanted to export. And I said, quite often you start with your regional Codex Alimentarius and say, these are the foods that we need a standard for through Codex Alimentarius so that we can trade. The same thing's going to happen with the new technology. You know, we've been working with this with the genetically modified seeds and stuff like that. Codex Alimentarius has picked that up and at least set some standards for it. Now, that doesn't mean that all the countries are going to purchase it and accept it, because some of them still feel that it's bioterrorism because of lots of different things that have to do with GMOs, and maybe not the seed itself, but the way that it's being administered. So it's the same thing with all the new foods that are coming up. There's going to have to be a standard, and that will be through your Codex Alimentarius. So what you need to do is the person who is your point person for Codex Alimentarius is going to have to take that to Codex, what your viewpoint is. And if you're making that food in the laboratory, you want to have a voice in what those standards are going to be.
All right. I guess we'll have to close some of the questions here. Perhaps you could ask Miss Christine directly, since we're almost at the end of our webinar. So we apologize for being unable to answer some of the questions left in our question box, but we'll also send Miss Christine these questions for her, and we'll get back to you on the response via email. Right. So Christine, thank you so much for delivering and answering some of the most important questions with our attendees regarding food fraud. And I think a lot of the questions were really there on the food fraud aspects, and some of them are more of clarifications as well. Okay. So to formally close our program, may I call on Sir Albert Carizo, the OIC of the Food Development Center of the Department of Agriculture, for his closing message. Sir Albert, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. This is my closing message. It is with delight that I take this opportunity to join you this morning. The Department of Agriculture's Food Development Center, or FDC, which I represent, strongly endorse and emphasize the importance of creating awareness on issues such as food fraud prevention through like this. Through the food fraud is viewed mainly as an economical issue, food fraud also significant impact on consumer health and safety depending on the
Oh no, I think his internet cut off.
Mhm. We lost Sir Albert there, but I think we can ask Christine to just take on this slot. Perhaps you can have some, closing messages for our participants. I think some of them are looking forward for you coming over here in the Philippines and do that course on labeling.
Yeah.
Some of them are giving us, notes that perhaps we can just give them updates on whether that will pursue. Perhaps we're looking next year. We're looking at next year.
I would love to do that. I think I have seen the need for it. And I've worked with Winrock and I've worked with Venture 37 and a lot of the different US NGOs. And I think this is something that has become very important with our aid, that we enable countries to be able to solve their own problems. And you can't do it if you don't have the knowledge to do it. And just giving or dictating what we would like sometimes does not come through with how the application needs to be done. Quite often in academia, we're good at giving you the big picture, but when it comes to actually implementing that big picture, it's a very different thing. And you really need the one-on-one sessions to be able to implement that and help your country move forward. And I would love that opportunity to do that.
Yes,
We're
we have.
looking forward.